He had only made a statement during a live broadcast, and Jimmy Butler had filed the biggest media lawsuit in history over that statement. A $100 million lawsuit. Yes, but before we get into the details of that lawsuit, join our growing community and subscribe to our basketball-focused channel. And don't forget to like and comment for more basketball stories. The NBA's preseason media event was held in Miami, as it is every year. The stage was big, the audience was attentive, and as for the atmosphere in the hall, the tension was almost palpable. In the large studio that had been prepared, camera flashes, social media live broadcasts, and almost all of the big names in basketball were there. But that day, there was an issue outside of the game that was about to become the biggest story of the season. Jimmy Butler was one of the most important faces of his team. He was held up as an example, both for his leadership on the court and his mentorship of younger players. Jimmy was also a speaker at a panel discussion organized by the NBA on the role of athletes in society. He was joined by former players, commentators, and a few media figures. One of them was ESPN commentator Chris Broussard. Jimmy sat up straight in his seat on stage, picked up the microphone, and began his speech. Working with young people isn't just about basketball for me. I actually want to give them something beyond the game. Education scholarships, neighborhood clinics, even summer camps. These things are definitely our responsibility. There was plenty of applause in the hall, but eyes were still on the other figure on stage, Chris Broussard. Then Chris took the microphone. At first, he made his usual comments. However, without turning to the audience, he suddenly added a sentence to his speech as if by accident. It's very sad to hear that some players stay in luxury hotels and travel on private jets with their team budgets. That money should be spent on young people and education. The hall suddenly fell silent. No one knew who he was referring to, but everyone already knew who he was referring to. Chris didn't even look in Jimmy's direction. He put down his microphone and returned to his notes. It was as if he had said nothing at all, as if he hadn't just made a career-ending statement in front of the entire country. Jimmy didn't even turn his head to look. He just straightened his back a little more and clasped his hands on his knees. There was no expression on his face. But for a moment, his eyes looked deeper than the cameras. He didn't react, because if he did, the headlines would already be ready. Butler exploded. Jimmy got overly angry on live TV. The stage had cooled down a bit. The event was still going on, but the audience was now more focused on their phone screens than the stage. In no time, Chris's comment had been clipped and, of course, subtitles were added. It went viral on X and Instagram at the same time. It reached millions in less than a minute. Some accounts added mocking music, others added dramatic effects. When the panel ended, everyone knew that it wasn't just an ordinary comment that had been made that day. A career had been dealt a blow, of course. As he was leaving the backstage area, a reporter tried to get his attention by shouting, "Jimmy, can we get a response to Chris Broussard's comment? Do you have a response?" Jimmy didn't even acknowledge him. He just kept walking. Accompanied by his manager, Marcus T. Lewis, and 2 assistants, he left the hall. As he walked, the sound of his shoes hitting the floor was like a point shot for every word. Silence is sometimes the harshest response. Marcus leaned forward in the car. "Should we make a statement? At least a tweet?" Jimmy shook his head. "No, we're not talking right now. Let them talk." Looking out the window, his voice was low but clear. Of course he couldn't say my name, but we all know very well who he meant. Marcus silently put his phone in his pocket. The car was silent for a while, but only one sentence kept running through Jimmy's mind. This was not a mistake. This was definitely a strategy. At that moment, he had already made up his mind. This was not going to stay in the media. He felt compelled to take this to court. That night in Miami, Jimmy's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Everyone from his former teammates to his social media manager to his college coach was sending him messages. But there was one message that really shook him up. It was from his mother. She was calling from Chicago. He answered the phone right away. "What's going on, son? Why is this man saying such things? You've never been that kind of person." Jimmy took a deep breath and replied, "He thinks he can silence me, Mom, but he has no idea he's picked the wrong person." When he hung up, his eyes were fixed on the screen. The Miami night was still quiet, but the digital world had turned into a raging fire. Chris's statement was no longer just a clip. It was a headline. Had luxury Jimmy, had Jetgate, taxpayer swindle. People were filled with context-free, unrealistic rumors. Some wrote that he made special spa payments from the team budget, while others wrote that he mixed luxury brand sponsorships with irregularities. But none of it was true. The next morning, Jimmy met with his manager, Marcus. Jimmy's sports lawyer, Daryl Johnson, was also there. The hotel conference room was quiet, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. Marcus projected his tablet onto the screen. We're at 6.3 million views on Instagram right now. We're trending #1 on X. A subforum has been opened on Reddit. The headline is, "Could Jimmy be embezzling the budget?" Daryl placed the file on the table. The size of the lie isn't important. What matters is how fast it spread. And right now, it's completely exploded. Jimmy's voice was very determined. "I'm taking this to court, but of course not with rumors. With real documents." Daryl shook his head. "If you want to proceed legally, we have to be very careful. This will turn from a lawsuit into a media war, and we will only proceed with what we know to be true." At that moment, Marcus checked his phone, and his expression changed. Some people are marching to the office. One of them is carrying a sign that says, "Where did the money go, Jimmy?" There's a division among the fans. Jimmy slowly slammed his fist on the table. "I've supported those people for years, even outside of basketball. I opened a school and even gave scholarships. They don't have the right to destroy everything with one comment." Daryl took a file out of his pocket. "It was delivered to me last night. Anonymous sender. Inside." He opened the envelope. Inside was a chain of emails written before an NBA media event, allegedly from ESPN's internal communications. An employee was warning Chris Broussard, "Jimmy Butler is absolutely clean in his ethical records. He is a transparent player whose financial history is frequently audited. Any comments that could be perceived as personal attacks should be avoided." The response below was even more striking. "He'll handle it. The media will eat it up." Jimmy stared at the page in his hand for a long time. "So this was actually planned?" Daryl spoke seriously. "This email chain could be the most basic document for filing a lawsuit, but we can't identify who sent it. For now, it's just a lead." Marcus spoke up. "If we're really going to file a lawsuit, we'll have to build a wall, not just a file. All the documents, witnesses, and specific threats." Jimmy shook his head. "They threw the first stone. Now it's my turn." That day, a small but decisive decision was made in Jimmy's Miami office. A $100 million reputation lawsuit. It would include both compensation and punitive damages. The goal was not to create public opinion, but simply to reveal the truth. That same evening, Jimmy received another call. The number was private. Jimmy hesitated to answer, but finally pressed the button. "Jimmy Butler, I don't know you, but I used to work for ESPN. I watched the panel. I know what's going on. You'll receive something within 48 hours. That's all for now." The phone hung up abruptly. Jimmy bowed his head. When Marcus entered the room, all he heard were these words. "This isn't just my case anymore." In a world where everyone is being silenced, this was someone saying, "Enough is enough." The next day, preparations for the lawsuit officially began. Daryl set to work gathering files, getting opinions from reliable experts, and tracking down the leaked emails. Marcus reorganized the social media team to deal with the media pressure. Jimmy, meanwhile, was focused on one thing amid all the commotion: doing the right thing. But no matter how quiet he remained, the media continued to spin. A blog site published a fake document, a list that claimed to show Jimmy's expenses over the past 3 years, with distorted figures and dates that clearly didn't match up, and which was obviously fabricated. Marcus was furious when he got his hands on the document. "The numbers are made up. 2 different sources have been combined. The goal is clear: to discredit him before he can come out." Jimmy narrowed his eyes. "Yes, this is a war, and I'm not afraid." From that moment on, everything changed. The incident had gone from being a routine media crisis to a systematic smear campaign. Jimmy's decision was final. The more they kept quiet, the more they would come after them. But if he spoke out, he would pave the way for thousands of athletes who had chosen to remain silent. 2 days later, at 9:12 a.m., the file was delivered to the Miami-Dade courthouse. The case was officially opened. Jimmy Butler vs. Chris Broussard, a $100 million defamation and discrediting lawsuit. Marcus was with Daryl Johnson when he delivered the documents. Jimmy was alone that morning. He had visited a children's basketball school in one of Miami's neighborhoods. An 11-year-old boy there turned to him before taking to the court and said, "Sir, I look up to you. I don't know what they're writing about you, but my mom told me that man is definitely an honest person." That sentence gave Jimmy all the answers he needed that morning. That day, the lawsuit was leaked online. It was first reported by a small local media outlet. The headline was clear: Jimmy Butler sues Chris Broussard for $100 million. Within 30 minutes, the news spread to all major media platforms. ESPN, Bleacher Report, even national news broadcasts opened with this story. Marcus smiled as he looked at his phone screen. Look, Jimmy. The impact we were waiting for has arrived, but the real lawsuit is just beginning." The petition contained 3 immediate elements: video of the panel commentary. A full analysis of the broadcast revealed that Broussard's choice of words was suggestive. Linguistic experts analyzed that the phrase "some players" was not directly accusatory, but was intended to be suggestive. The leaked email chain. Despite a warning 3 days before the panel that Jimmy's ethics file is spotless, be careful, Chris's team had devised a strategic exit plan. The phrase, "he'll take care of it, the media will eat it up," in the email showed that the comment was not accidental, but deliberate. Witness statements and financial reports. Account records submitted by Jimmy's financial advisor, manager Marcus, and lawyer Daryl, which were subject to independent audits every year, clearly showed that there were no irregularities in the expenditures. When Jimmy got his hands on a copy of the file, he said only one sentence: "The truth alone may not be enough, but it's the truth that starts it all." Social media was mixed at first. Some comments still accused Jimmy, but a new group had already formed. Those who wanted the truth: young athletes, college basketball players, black coaches, and some former NBA stars sent messages of support to Jimmy. Meanwhile, Chris Broussard's camp wasn't sitting idle. Of course, the next morning, a statement was released simultaneously to 3 major media outlets. The comments were not directed at any individual. Chris Broussard was making a general statement about the spending of public funds. There was no specific reference to any athlete or team. When Marcus read this statement on his phone, he pursed his lips. "So it's not a crime if you don't name names. Is that really their defense?" Daryl shook his head. "Classic media tactic. It's a defense that goes back and forth between 'I didn't say that' and 'but I'm sorry if that's how it was understood. But we have emails, expert opinions, and clear context. They can't ignore that." Chris Broussard appeared on television for the first time after the statement. He wore a white shirt, spoke in a calm tone, and kept his facial expressions under control. "Everyone who has followed me for years knows that I don't slander anyone. If someone took it that way, that's not my problem." This statement seemed to convince some, but most viewers were aware of something. Broussard had carefully measured every word and chosen every facial expression with great care. That same night, Jimmy was sitting with his mother when the phone rang. It was Marcus. "Buddy, there's another leak, but this time it's not from us. Digital journalist Reckon Report has published another document attached to that email file." Jimmy sat up straight. "What document?" "The internal meeting transcript. Broussard's preparatory meeting with his media advisors. There's a line in there. I won't name names, but people never question their emotions. If you're harsh enough, everyone will believe you." Jimmy quietly hung up the phone. He put the water on the table. "I'm not alone in this fight anymore." The leak of the transcript changed everything. It wasn't just the NBA world that was shaken up, but all commentary on media ethics. It was no longer just a matter of clearing Jimmy's name. Now it was also about questioning how irresponsibly the media could act. The transcript published by Reckon Report created a serious rift not only in the sports community, but also in the general public. The phrase, "people don't question their feelings," started a new hashtag on social media: fact check feelings. From night to morning, Jimmy's situation in the media had gone from being a defense against accusations to a quest for justice. People were now asking, if false accusations can be made on such a large platform with no consequences, who will be the next victim? Chris Broussard's team still preferred to remain silent. However, this silence made their responsibility even more apparent to the public. As they remained silent, the documents spoke for themselves, and experts continued to analyze their statements on screen. Each analysis supported the idea that Chris's statement was not accidental, but rather planned. Jimmy's team, on the other hand, was fully immersed in court preparations. Daryl Johnson had completed all document verification processes. Expert witnesses, media analysts, and even a former ESPN employee had been added to the witness list. The witness, who did not wish to disclose their name to the public, was ready to testify in a closed-door hearing. Marcus was carefully planning every media move to be made before the court date. No public statements were made during this process. Jimmy remained silent, even on social media. But this silence was not a sign of weakness. It was the silent precursor to a big wave that was about to hit. And that wave came from an unexpected place. Coach Williams, one of the legendary coaches in NBA history, had not appeared on screen for a long time. He was known for his impartiality and his distance from both political views. However, one morning he appeared live on CNN. When the anchor asked him a question, he spoke without hesitation. "I have known Chris Broussard for many years. I respect him as a media figure, but this is not a personal issue. It is a matter of principle. If a player, a human being, is publicly disparaged through insinuations and it is proven to be false, then that person has the right to go to court. Being an athlete should not mean giving up your rights." Those words gave Jimmy's case unexpected legitimacy. Jimmy was no longer alone, and the public could see that. Messages of support poured in. Law students at universities were studying the case as a case study. For young athletes, this case was a stand and an example. But every rise is met with an attempt to slow it down. Chris Broussard's team launched a media offensive. This time, it was more of an attack than a defense. First, a research report was leaked. It was a sloppily prepared but professionally presented document containing supposed analyses of Jimmy's past financial records. Then, several sports commentators, especially those close to Broussard, began repeating the same message on TV shows. There seemed to be inconsistencies in Jimmy's spending. Who knows? Maybe this lawsuit is an attempt to divert attention. Marcus was furious when he looked at the documents. Half of the figures are from different periods. The other half are expenses that have already been approved by the NBA. Daryl was more level-headed. But it's not real. It's about making noise. Because if you say it enough, it becomes real. That's exactly the tactic we outlined in our case file. They want to drown us. But you know we have the real documents. Jimmy just silently gathered the documents on the table, stood up, and walked away. Marcus called after him. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to give my answer. But it won't be on their turf. It has to be on my turf." That evening, Jimmy made a surprise speech at a civil society event in Miami. There was no press in front of him. There were no stage lights. There were only a few cameras in the corners of the hall, and people who had come to listen. When he took the microphone, his eyes were full, but his voice was clear as ever. "A lot has been said about me in recent weeks. Some of it is lies. Some of it is worse than lies. Yes, I imply. But I am not here today to give a speech of innocence. This is not a defense. This is a clear statement." The atmosphere in the hall grew heavy. The audience fell silent, their eyes fixed on Jimmy. Being an athlete means being watched by thousands of young people every day. I am aware of this responsibility. That is why I filed this lawsuit. Because what was done to me was not done to me alone. Tomorrow it could be done to another player, a coach, or even an ordinary fan. After a short pause, he fixed his gaze on the audience. "I'm not trying to clear my name. There's no need for that. But I have to speak up for everyone involved in the game, because silence is no longer silence. It's complicity." His speech was met not with applause, but with silent respect. People stood up. Those who made eye contact nodded their heads. Jimmy put the microphone back in its place and quietly left the hall. But the next morning, A video of the speech was circulating on social media. This time, it wasn't Jimmy's team who had posted it. An ordinary university student had recorded it on their cell phone in the hall. The video reached 6 million views in just 8 hours. One of the comments stood out. "This is not a lawsuit. This is the true story of a heart that refuses to be silenced." That sentence remained on Jimmy's phone screen for a long time that morning. He didn't show it to anyone. He didn't read it to anyone. But those were the exact words he would carry in his mind throughout the entire trial. Because now, it was no longer just a matter of protecting his reputation, but of standing behind the truth and not backing down, despite all the pressure. And then the day came, the day of the trial. The Miami-Dade courthouse began to fill up early in the morning. The press, protesters, supporters. People carrying banners seemed divided into two groups. Some shouted, "The press cannot be silenced," while others chanted, "The truth is always on Jimmy's side." The sky was overcast, and a light rain was falling, but no one was leaving. Everyone seemed to want to be a part of one of the most talked-about days in American history. Jimmy entered the courthouse with his lawyer, Daryl Johnson, and his manager, Marcus T. Lewis. He was wearing a simple dark blue suit. He wore neither glasses nor a hat. He raised his eyes and walked forward without looking at the press crowd. It was quite quiet inside. The jury seats were packed. The judge was known for his dignity and impartiality. There were no cameras inside due to a media blackout. But everyone in the room knew they were witnessing history. Daryl stood up and turned to the jury. "This case is not a direct accusation against an athlete. This case is the result of a media attack that was implied, but had a direct effect. My client may not have been named, but we all know that the implication was very clear. And despite prior warnings not to say these things, this strategy was deliberately employed. This was not just a comment, but rather an official attack." The opposing attorney spoke in a different tone. "Members of the jury, my client, Mr. Broussard, made a general public criticism. He did not name names. He did not present any documents. Therefore, there is no defamation here. Even if there is, it is not intent, but perception. In other words, his comments may have been misunderstood. But this is definitely not a matter for a lawsuit." The court was silent. Then the evidence was presented one by one. A video of the broadcast on the panel was watched. Broussard's facial expressions, intonation, and even the small pauses he made in his sentences were analyzed. Linguistic experts explained the patterns they identified as emotional steering techniques. Then the email files were presented. The line, "He'll take care of it, the media will eat it up," was met with deep silence in the courtroom. And finally, the leaked transcript. "I won't name names, but people never question their feelings." When this sentence was read, some members of the jury took notes and shook their heads. When it was the witness's turn, Daryl turned to Jimmy and nodded. Jimmy stood up. He walked to the center of the courtroom and sat down in the witness chair. He placed his hands on his knees. He did not bow his head. When he heard the microphone turn on, he kept his voice low but clear. "For me, this trial is not an advertising campaign. This trial is the result of my decision not to remain silent in the face of a system that is trying to destroy a career I have worked for years with a single sentence. Everyone has the right to speak, of course, but the words you speak must have a price. I did not want to pay that price alone." When the lawyer began cross-examination, he asked directly, "Mr. Butler, has your fame increased as much as this case has been in the news?" "Perhaps. But if I had filed this lawsuit for fame, I would have stood in front of the cameras on the first day and cried. Instead, I chose to speak out on days when there were no cameras." "Mr. Butler, some see this lawsuit as a career move. What do you say? Are the men who are tarnishing my career with insinuations on a panel making a career move? Or am I, who filed a lawsuit to clear my name? Which do you think?" At that moment, the silence in the courtroom was heavier than the noise outside. The judge had adjourned the session. He ordered the jury to retire to deliberate. Hours passed. It had grown dark outside. Jimmy was sitting in a waiting room at the courthouse with his mother. Marcus was looking at his phone in the corner, while Daryl silently watched out the window. No one spoke. But they all knew that these hours were not just passing for a decision. They were passing for a destiny. And finally, at 6:43 a.m., the clerk entered. "The jury has reached a verdict." The courtroom was packed again. Jimmy stood up. So did Broussard. They didn't even look at each other. The foreman stood up and began reading the verdict. The verdict is in favor of the plaintiff. He has been found guilty of defamation, damage to reputation, and intentional media manipulation. Of the $100 million in damages sought, $83 million has been deemed appropriate. There was a moment of silence, and then a suppressed gasp came from the back of the courtroom. Some people cried, some bowed their heads. But Jimmy just took a deep breath. He remained standing, his hands at his sides. There was no obvious smile on his face, but the pride in his eyes was clear, the silent applause of justice. The press was waiting for him outside. Microphones were held out. The cameras shook as they moved closer. Jimmy said only one sentence. "I didn't file this lawsuit to win, but to show what is right. And today, as always, truth has prevailed." The image of that moment spread across the country, but the most shared image was that of a fan silently hugging Jimmy as he left the courthouse. The banner around that fan's neck read simply, "I may be small, but now my voice is loud." Yes, this case began as the struggle of a single athlete, but in the end, it represented the silenced voices of thousands. And Jimmy Butler may not have been on the court, but he won one of the toughest battles of his life and wrote his name in history once again. What about you? If someone dragged your name through the mud, would you stay silent? Write your thoughts in the comments. We want to see those who speak up for the truth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes a story gives courage to thousands who remain silent.